Hey there, welcome to episode 10 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this on the reasonably late evening of the 31st of January, 2024, Wednesday night. Episode 10 is of the new era, in case you're joining us around now. There were several episodes of this program that are still available on Spotify, same channel. If you go back in time to around 2021, so we've rebooted the channel and looking forward to trying out some new ideas as we move into 2024. As we get comfortable, you can hear my voices complaining already. I'm gonna have to pause probably for a moment. The title of this episode is News and Journalism and Media Platforms. So you can guess what we're going to be talking about today. At some point, I will have guests on this program for these specific topics. As more of a feel for what this program is about becomes more clear. And I should point out, as I have now and then in previous episodes, FFS Talk, if you've ever been to Ireland or if you know an Irish person, they make use of the expanded form of FFS, not for sensitive ears perhaps, not that bad. But essentially, this program is about what works, what doesn't, and what we can do about it. So at some point, there is a realization that something is not working, the exclamation, FFS, and then we get to work fixing it. All right, I did a little pause there, so hopefully we'll see how the voice holds out. So yes, the news and journalism and media platforms. These are interesting times, particularly right now, here in January 2024, right at the end. There have been nothing but layoffs across the tech sector, but also in major news media outlets. Even the Wall Street Journal, I think today, announced they will be laying off some people. Even TikTok, I think, laid off some people. Everybody's getting laid off. The definition of what news really is may vary per person. Who and what each person gets their news, or where I should say, from who and where each person gets their news varies as well. If there is still room for investigative journalism and authoritative information outlets, well, they might be leaving us. So we're going to have to do something about that. I have several links in the show notes. I just read you the summary. The show notes should be available wherever you found this audio program, ideally. Any moment now, I'm getting pretty close to what I want the various properties to look like and how they will work as part of a larger audio program publishing scheme. Publishing to Spotify is not ideal. Publishing to Amazon Music or Google Podcasts, which will become YouTube Podcasts, I think. Not ideal as the primary. So owning your brand. I've talked about this in other programs. Owning your brand, owning how you publish, and syndicating it to other places makes more sense. So the ffstalk.com domain will be populated any day now. And the actual point of origin for our content will be on a site we control and that we publish. And then we can display all the links and show notes and related information. You can hear loud exhaust from a street near our recording studio. But in the meantime, the links, hopefully visible in the show notes, in the description in the show notes for this episode, wherever you have found this audio program. We will start with the usual, the self-promotion, free of shame, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. I'll keep it brief this time around. I have links to my various audio programs and some other projects. I'm not totally thrilled with the way the buymeacoffee.com website enables page editing. The profile page on which I place these links is not great. They have some bugs, to be honest. That's what happens when you let software engineers play with your software, right? So not totally thrilled, but it works as a sort of starting point for those who are, want a one-stop shop with links to what I'm working on. The reason I'm using Buy Me a Coffee is occasionally, I think five times, Someone has literally bought me a coffee, and any proceeds contributed there do in fact go towards coffee, beans, or related items. I gotta say, I do make cappuccino in the morning with heavy whipping cream. So Italians, I'm sorry, but it's quite good. I enjoy it. Don't forget also Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. Similar idea. I'm not totally thrilled with that site either. Neither of these sites is really automatable. So they are what they are, but they are there. That's the extent of my monetization of this audio program. So value for value, if that. You are under no circumstances obligated in any way to spend money on either of these. But especially the buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo page, the profile page, has links to my various audio programs, and it will be there that I will also have links to the primary sites for each of these programs and various other projects and so on. So there you go. On with the show. I have an article about doing your own research, which became very popular during the dark times of the pandemic. This is a recent article, but it's something that has come up. I think it's mentioned in that article, in fact, on Forbes, that DYOR, doing your own research, was something coined, kind of said out loud. Of course, anybody can do their own research anytime. But it was coined, I think, in 2016. I'm not looking at the article right now. Maybe I'll flip over to that. But basically, it's I'm going to do my own research, which means I'm going to read what other people have written, unless you are one like myself who reads the NIH studies. Maybe you read Nature or other outlets where actual scientific papers are preprint or actually published. If you can at least read over the abstract and the conclusion, and you come away like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Speaking of pandemics, so in general, if you want to find out and you do actual research, well, no harm, no foul. That's good. But oftentimes doing research means listening to what Joe Rogan says, or maybe he has a guest on and the guest is interesting, and that's all I got to know. So not uncommon. We'll get into that a little bit more. Mainstream media bloodbath. Yes, I mentioned during the intro there, we are experiencing massive layoffs. Newsrooms are walking out. They're frustrated. They're giving up, or they're being handed their walking papers, as the saying goes. There's not a lot of money left over, I guess, in the media business. It really comes down to advertising and distribution, right? So there's an old saying, which I believe, I think I have it as I have it down there below. We'll get to that in a second. But there's an old saying, of my advertising, I'm going to paraphrase it. Of my advertising budget, I know 50% is effective. I'm just not sure which 50%. So when things become ad-driven and distribution falls, then it's hard to get the money for the advertising, and then you have to lay off your staff because you can't afford to pay the people you hired during the good times. And this is happening in the tech sector too, so not a huge surprise. The question is, for the tech sector, the jobs are there. There will just be a reckoning for some companies, and there will be a reorganization of some companies. A lot of tech people will start their own companies. So a lot of that will sort of come out in the wash. The media business is a little bit trickier. You can only have so many Substack journalists, right? You can only have so many YouTubers. Content creation reaches its limits eventually. Not everyone can support on coffee money, right? So it's a tricky business, I would think. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. Bringing back local news, an article in The Atlantic, and you can say what you will about The Atlantic or any news source, any news platform. Used to be a publication, but it could be a platform. It could be YouTube. It could be a YouTube channel. It could be a New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, the Daily Mail, The Guardian, all these different platforms. You get what you get. This person is the president who wrote this article. It's about the notion of government funding for local news. He's the president, I believe, of the, where did I put it? It's rebuildinglocalnews.org. Rebuild local news. I put an ing in there. Rebuildlocalnews.org. That's basically what they're driving for, is funding, probably from the federal government, to enable, sort of like PBS, probably could combine a donor model and empower local news platforms. So probably a combination of video and audio, podcasting, video content, website, written word, etc. I have comments about that in general, which I'll get to at the end. But rebuilding local news, interesting, probably more viable than rebuilding, like starting today to try to build a New York Times or Washington Post or San Francisco Examiner, etc. That would be a major undertaking, probably profoundly difficult to get funding. Not that these aren't national outlets, they're still local, but they are papers of record, or they had been. So that's a substantial challenge to try to publish at that scale, which means paying a lot of reporters and getting a lot of advertising and so on. So probably a reboot will come from below, and we'll have smaller entities focusing more locally. Access to global news stories will be interesting, but yeah, we'll see. Interesting times. I have a couple of links about journalism. Oftentimes people will report on things and they will know of reporters, but the notion of being an investigative journalist or being a consumer of investigative journalism isn't differentiated all the time. There's investigative journalism, a little rundown on that, and then a comparison on The Guardian between reporting versus journalism. That's from 2009, but it's essentially the same. I mean, the question is whether your reporter has done the work or has gathered the work, I guess, if I could oversimplify. There is a Las Vegas patch. So patch.com was an attempt at local news platforms that people could sort of, I guess you could sprout your own patch. And I want to say AOL bought them at some point or was a part of it and sponsored them or something. I don't think it really ever caught on as it maybe could have. I have a link to the Las Vegas patch. It's not great. You're better off just visiting the various local media outlets. There's the Review Journal, the Las Vegas Sun, and then the news channels 3, 5, and 8 at least. Various YouTubers talk about things, topical. There's KNPR, which is Nevada Public Radio, not NPR. I'm not a fan. I don't really listen to that station at all. But there's also the Nevada Current, the Nevada Independent. These are less well-known, perhaps. They send out email newsletters, and they have websites. So there's a lot of resources that one could visit now. They're essentially print newspapers placed online. In the case of TV news, your typical TV news broadcast, and then they fill in news articles. And then, of course, you're going to get a lot of random advertising for all manner of silliness. Personally, I think it degrades the value of the outlet. If you scroll down below the fold, you're basically getting tabloid advertising or worse. But the Las Vegas patch on there as an example of a platform that I think had potential, didn't really work out. There was another platform a long time ago called Topics. I believe it was Topix. That was sort of similar. It would be more of a news aggregation site, according to, as the name implies, Topics. I don't know if that's still around even. I didn't even look. I was never a huge fan. It was an interesting idea. I don't think it really caught on. I have a link about the inverted pyramid. If you are not familiar, if you never took a kind of intro to journalism in your high school, if you're not working on the school paper, I will remind you, listener or reader, I think there's a transcript of this published automatically on Spotify. My first exposure to publishing a school newspaper, I was in 8th grade, and I was typesetting, because I was a computer nerd, I was typesetting our local paper on campus, a bunch of 8th graders writing news articles. A good start. So I did the typesetting, which means I basically had to read every single character that went into the paper, and then quite literally getting the printed output so we could literally paste up our comps so that we could have them actually printed. was an interesting time. So camera-ready strips that were pre-glued, so we could place them on the layout page, move them around as needed. It was pretty neat. It was a good educational activity. So the inverted pyramid, if you are not familiar though, you present all the things you need to know, all the important stuff, the big stuff, the big details at the top in the first paragraph. Sometimes you'll see some stuff in the deck or in a tease on a front page or a subhead. But essentially the opening paragraph of a typical traditional journalistic style guide article. Who, what, when, where, why, how. For a while, they were saying, and don't forget, wow, got to make it sound exciting. And that's probably our undoing. But anyway, so the inverted pyramid, something to be aware of. It's the tradition, because even online journalism is still just like print, just like the old days. I have a link on to a Britannica article on yellow journalism, which I've seen people think that it's somehow related to the color of the newspaper, or in one case, you can make it a racial thing, perhaps. It had to do with the yellow kid. I believe that was what it was called. I could pull that up. It was Pulitzer versus what's his name? No, not Hertz. Okay, I'm pulling up the article. Britannica. Britannia, that's Ultima 5. Yellow Kid, yes, Yellow Kid. So, yellow journalism, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. I was going to say Hertz. Hearst. Two big names, you've heard them. So they went to war. They were basically trying to get readership, so they were battling for circulation. There was a little coup. They stole the artist who was drawing the Yellow Kid, Richard Outcault. He was drawing this cartoon. It was super popular. So when they stole it, there was another guy hired named George Lux, and so they became rivals over cartoons. That's about the size of our modern era as well. But they became rivals. So it was really just this question of how can we get more people to buy our paper for whatever's inside. And you can see this in the modern day when the entertainment division of different media outlets became responsible for news. So got to make news entertaining. That's how you make money. So yeah, it was more sensational headlines. Who has the better comic strip, I guess, and so on. So it became more sizzle than steak, I suppose. So yeah, quick little rundown on yellow journalism, which I think is important because today a lot of news outlets are, well, we'll get to this, but yeah, news outlets, now that you can see the metrics of, likes and shares and views and subscribers and all this, it starts to become a numbers game, and it gets worse from there. The which half part, Wanamaker attributed most of the time with the quote about the 50%, the half advertising, but which half? So I have a link on that. Reporting on Reporting, the Copyright Alliance on copyright and journalism and news reporting. So this becomes interesting when you are a tiny little newspaper or podcaster, audio program producer like myself, or maybe a YouTuber. You don't really have the resources to go to other parts of the planet, Mars, out to the James Webb Telescope. So you consume reporting by others, and you craft your own reporting, if you want to call it that, based on these other news sources. So that has been, I couldn't find the actual court case, but this has been tested in court. So you cannot wholesale reprint articles without permission. That's copyright. But because you are performing a transformation on the work, transformative work, you, and legitimately as a news story, you can, for example, if you took 2 or 3, as I was mentioning earlier, if you took all the news sources in the greater Vegas area, you comb through a particular, version of a point in time in a story timeline, and you did that over the course of a, court case or sporting event, whatever it is. If you constructed an assessment or a report based on the reporting, if you did a meta-analysis, those are protected. They're transformative works, and you can even excerpt, you can quote, you put in the attribution, you do the right thing. That is completely legal, protected, copyright, use of copyrighted material in a transformative work, and it's for the greater good, right? You're not even if you make money on it, you are not trying to do damage. You are merely, you're transforming the work. You are adding some value. So if you can take, as I do, I don't really excerpt. Occasionally I have read a brief passage from a link, but I mostly just send you to the links if you want. But if I were to read passages from links and comment and so on, sort of a reaction podcast of sorts. And you've heard podcasters doing this forever. One of the podcasts that I used to listen to quite frequently was No Agenda. Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak would have audio clips that they would play from news reporting or elsewhere, and then they would comment on it. So same thing. Transformative works, legitimate, not the reaction videos of today, which are a different problem. But this is in earnest, and it's not unlike writing a report or doing any sort of research where you have a bibliography, your references. I went through these papers, I interviewed these subjects, I created this work based on those works. That is how the world works. So that is completely legitimate, and I think that will be a component of a successful, I saw somewhere a mention of Media 3.0. So the new era of media, especially smaller local media platforms and outlets, will almost certainly take advantage of, whether formally, like a partnership arrangement of some sort, or informally by making use through attribution and fair use of leveraging the work of a community. I don't like that word, but a community of journalists and reporters and even content creators. And finally, the history of the printing press. Thank you, Gutenberg. I think it was Johann Gutenberg. Suddenly, everyone could get the word out far and wide. Yes, your fingers would be covered with ink, but wine press style beginnings. Look how far we've come. WordPress is only one example of the modern take, but it is how things started. And if you actually look at the transition before and after the Gutenberg printing press came into being, that may be sort of where we are now. Maybe, sort of. Did I say that? So there you go. On with the show again. So what is news? By the way, I mentioned I started my my foray into any sort of news media when I was in 8th grade. So that was age 13. I didn't really work on the school paper in high school. I did some underground journalism in college. I was interviewed by the LA Times one time. The local media situation when I lived in Sunnyvale was a little iffy because all local media was owned outside of the city. So we did start Radio Sunnyvale at that time, which I think I mentioned later. And of course now I feel that the news media as it is in the greater Vegas area does a disservice to the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. So I have thoughts. So news, and I'm just winging it, you probably have a variation of this. It's a description of something topical and useful, perhaps even important. It could be news of the day. It could be news from a war-torn area. It could be news of an uplifting and happy kind. It could be news about a food delivery or a package delivery. It could be a lot of things. So it's telling you, it's letting you know something topical and useful, perhaps important, that you can make use of from that point forward. Right? News could be anything. Of course, we've tacked on more meaning if you, in context, apply the term news to a variety of things. They can be fake news. They can be trustworthy news. They can be untrusted news. They can be what is it called? Mainstream media. Mainstream media that can be overly corporatized. It can be skewed by advertisers. So the news, I guess, is sort of different. It takes on its own agenda, its own nuance. And but the traditional news does start with that inverted pyramid. We've all come to know you basically have to read the first paragraph, although more and more now people read the first headline or just the headline. Can't be bothered. And fun fact, if you write an article for a news outlet, it is unlikely that you wrote the headline. I worked at salon.com. Did I mention that? So the people writing the headlines are interested in grabbing your attention, that yellow journalism influence. So they want you to see a headline and click on it and read it. Clickbait. More often than not, people take the headline and that's what they go with. I've seen it too many times. And so what you end up with is the headline is the story. Totally easy to get stuck in the hype loop. And the headline said this. Well, if you actually read the article that was written by the person that wrote the article, the headline was not. So you read the article and you're like, well, that headline was taking some liberties. So summarizing an article might be a useful application for AI, but summarizing the article into an attractive clickbaity headline, I think is more of a disservice. But news is often trusted. So when you hear a piece of news, like I said, if I get a package notification, your package was delivered, to me that's news. Do I trust that it was delivered? Well, let me go see. Oh, yep, there's a package. 95% of the time, maybe higher, that seems trustworthy. If I hear Joe Rogan giving advice on medical issues, not especially if he's speaking to one of his comedian friends. Comedians are funny. I love comedians. Not virologists, epidemiologists, or, doctors, right? They're not scientists usually. So where does news come from? First-person accounts are usually okay, although as we probably have heard in our travels, eyewitness reports are usually ridiculously unreliable. So you usually want to have first-person accounts from multiple people. That's where your reporter comes in. Your field reporter might speak to people. Hey, what did you see? Describe what were you feeling when that happened? Back in the old days, we had town criers. They would visit a place and shout out some updates. Those came from wherever, and they were telling the story from memory often, or maybe reading from a scroll, but not always completely reliable between stops. But town criers posted proclamations, maybe a new direction posted on a church door, or maybe the rules as proclaimed by the local lord, prince, king, whatever. Printed word on flyers. Pamphlets were popular in the early days of the colonies in North America, and papers when the printing became mainstream, I suppose. Papers, newspapers, eventually. The almanac, something I haven't thought about in a while. An almanac, that's something Benjamin Franklin did in his spare time. Spoken word. Once radio became possible, the town crier could now sit in a studio with some headphones on and speak to everyone all at once. Media presentations with video, and that once TV became a big thing, you may remember that Richard Nixon and John Kennedy were the first presidential candidates to conduct a televised presidential debate. And if you are curious about the power of video in reporting something like that, you may remember, or you can look it up for yourself. I'll leave that to the listener. Many believe that those listening on the radio, especially those listening to only the audio, felt that Nixon won. Those listening to the presentation while watching the video, so in other words, watching it on TV, felt that John F. Kennedy won. So it does matter. But do you know where your news really comes from? That's the question. Do you look at the name on the tin, right? Are you looking at the Washington Post or the Atlantic? I've run into people who immediately judge any words on platforms based on the platform. So instantly untrustworthy, and that could be. The byline, that's where you find out who the author was. If they choose to list all of the contributors, that's great. Do you know what the process is? Was there some reporting done, but there was a slew of investigative journalists or staff writers or researchers in general, the photographer, the person that conducted the phone interview, maybe the assistant to the, whatever. It could be any number of people that contribute. Probably everyone is aware of I'm of course the name escapes me. The book about the Watergate drama, and that is, I was going to say, it's All the President's Men. I was going to say A Few Good Men. That's a different movie. All the President's Men, and then the movie version of that is very dramatic in that it's basically the two writers. Now I'm going to try to remember their names. Bernstein. What's the other guy? It'll come to me. Woodward. Thank you. No notes for this one. Woodward and Bernstein. So obviously made much more attractive in the movie version, but the two people that scraped it together, various changes to the actual story depending on who you ask over the years, but essentially, you kind of knew who the main people were, but probably most people had no idea how they were getting their details, who their off the record deep background, obviously Deep Throat being the most infamous. So does anyone really know the process of getting news, or do you just, how many times have you heard someone say, I heard, and then they proclaim a truth that they cannot back up with any form of evidence, the chain of evidence, like where did this information come from? I heard it on the radio. Okay, so one of the reasons I try to put some links in with what I'm talking about is that you have some idea where I'm reaching for some of the details. Some of this is personal experience. Other things can be backed up by reference materials and so on, certainly definitions of things. If we were to look at how journalism works in general, I'm sure there are online courses, or we can look at any journalism school. So I heard is quite often, in my opinion, the beginning of some head shaking or maybe some face palming. But the fact is, we are all reporters now. For better or worse, anyone can now publish their opinions, as I'm doing now, informed or otherwise. And so often the word reporting is used, whether it's on a particular topic. Maybe people are interested in a topic and they do become reasonably expert just through sheer personal, individual effort. Certainly one can become an expert at a sport, at a particular team, etc. There are particular issues that one might become expert in, especially if you're talking about a local issue, if it affects your, maybe your homeowners association that you are forced to be a part of. Individual people, especially celebrities. Is Justin Bieber getting a divorce? Is Haley leaving him? Who cares? Some people do. So lots of people become reporters on various topics, whether they are formally reporting, or if they're just fans, or if they're just content creators. And so nowadays, if I were to be rendering judgment, I would say there is really no difference anymore from the perspective of most people. When they say, I heard Justin Bieber and Haley Bieber are getting a divorce. Is that her name? I think it is. Getting a divorce. Like, where'd you hear that? People magazine, I think, or TMZ, or somewhere else. Cheddar, Screen Rant. So who knows? Who knows where these details are coming from? But they become part of the narrative, and suddenly the lineage of such details is lost. There's a saying, and I do not recall, it may have been Mark Twain, and it's something like, the truth is still putting its pants on when a lie travels around the world, something like that. No, a lie travels around the world while the truth is putting its pants on. Yeah, well, same thing, different order. So yeah, it's so much easier to just make stuff up or to do I heard And then you have to undo the I heards to get the real truth out. And so that can be a challenge. So if we are all reporters now, but we are not held accountable, we're not responsible, we have no personal ethics, rather than being concerned about our reporter reputation, we are merely concerned with the clicks and the traffic and the advertiser dollars, then we should then be able to understand why large media companies are in the same boat. Too often, the person who is doing this quote unquote reporting is assigned some level of credibility by their audience, and so they can report on anything. They don't even have to stick with their topic of expertise. They can, once you have people's ear and they believe you, you can say whatever you want. And maybe I'm doing that now. They become the actual source of news. So just because Joe Rogan said it must be true, even though he's having a guest on your program does not impart their knowledge. Osmosis does not work that way, or so Joe Rogan said. Without some form of education, or at least awareness, this type of reporting is subject to all manner of cognitive bias, not the least of which is the availability bias, or the availability heuristic, if you like. That says the things I know that are around me are the basis of my judgment. So if you look at someone who is capturing global data, and then you argue with someone who is only working with people who walk in his office or her office, right? So you're looking at epidemiological data versus anecdotal patient data, for example, for a general practitioner doctor. The availability heuristic says, all of my patients have this. But the epidemiologist might say, well, you're looking at a non-random subset of a subset of a subset of a population in one geographical area, not on the scale that the event is occurring, right? So availability is a huge problem, but there's selection and there's some other biases. And those must be transparent. They must be, and not to mention political ideology, cultural, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all manner of bias. And if one does not account for that, and of course, confirmation bias on the audience side says, I like the way that person said that. I agree with them. I will listen to them some more. And so you tend to believe, because it's confirming your own beliefs, you believe that they are correct. You give them more credibility. The loop goes around. But we are not all journalists. Often the casual reporter is making use of published reporting from elsewhere. I already have links, which I am doing myself, that I'm pointing you in other places. So I don't claim to be reporting on anything today. This is more of an editorial, I suppose. They may be using personal experience or what they have heard from others to make their case. And as often the goal is to make a case of some sort. So real reporting, you would attempt to be unbiased. You'd attempt to be transparently informative without skewing your reporting. Now, human beings, that's very difficult to do. But rather than motivated reasoning, where you present the data to fill in your preconceived notion or the notion that your audience finds popular to favor your advertising dollar, you may try to go right up the middle, or you may claim to. So as a trained journalist, I'm sure that is covered somewhere, that you should leave your biases at the door. You should not come out in favor of a particular political candidate if you are reporting on them. There's a whole notion about journalists fraternizing with the subjects of their reporting now and then, especially in Washington. Individuals often do not have the focus, funds, or access to engage in real investigative journalism. So this is why you will often hear people reporting, content creators especially, on things they read on the internet, myself included. So the people spending the money, the time, the focus, the training, the education, the credibility, and so on, are creating their reporting. So it could be an investigative journalist who's actually pounding the pavement, as they say, doing the interviews, combing through documents, discovering the truth. Or it could be more of a reporter. And if you read one of the links I've included about the difference, the reporter may be gathering up these bits of information and constructing a narrative that is transparently news and not opinion, right? It's not done for entertainment or to satisfy their listeners. It's to be informative without overt bias. So if you don't have all these things, then you just resort to reporting on your YouTube channel or maybe on your audio program. And when you see that major media outlets are closing shop or having massive layoffs, there will be less information. There will be fewer items for people to pull from when they are doing their quote unquote reporting, and there will be less funding and perhaps less access for investigative journalists. So if you were an investigative journalist and you relied on the New York Times on your business card or press credentials to get you into places, and then suddenly you don't work for them anymore, you may be publishing on Substack or you may write a book, but you then have to go on your personal credibility, which is not a trivial thing, and many people have that. But you kind of have to go with that credibility to maintain access. You may not have the funds, so you better be selling books, or you better have that Substack newsletter, whatever your historically political leanings might be. Or you can publish your own. This is the modern era. You can have your own website and you can publish your own content any way you like, which we'll get to. Maybe we'll return to self-determinism, and reporters and investigative journalists and even content creators can do what they want. They can talk about what they want in ways that they want, but they can build their credibility and establish their credibility, but they can build their presence and awareness of what they're doing. And those who choose to follow them will do so because of their follower count and their likes and reads and views. Or maybe they'll say, oh, this is actually credible. Sometime in the future, maybe feedback on quote unquote news, or it could be documentaries, it could be a lot of things, but anything that's trying to be factual or educational, maybe instead of liking and disliking, there should be some sort of credibility, karma, clout. I think there have been a few attempts at this, but I think it would be more valuable, not based on the credentials, not on the New York Times or WAPO or HuffPo or whatever. But yeah, I know that this particular person or this group of reporters, this byline, carries with it credibility. I know what they've written here is probably as close to true as they've been able to bring it. But we are not journalists. Only a few people are. Gutenberg and modernity. So I mentioned the Gutenberg press kind of changed things a little bit. I don't know if you've ever seen it's not Guy Ritchie. What's his name? It was the teaser video for Prometheus where Mr. Whalen, who's the actor? His name is Guy something. He's talking about historical inventions and he says, gunpowder, a bit of a game changer. So yeah, the Gutenberg press, bit of a game changer. Suddenly you could print those pamphlets and flyers at scale, hand them out. The town crier could be handing out written word instead of hoping people heard him or her, probably him. So nowadays, modernity has brought us mostly a Gutenberg press in digital form. The inverted pyramid, the textual writing, each article is episodic. So the inverted pyramid again, so the top part, the wide part of the inverted pyramid, all the juicy details of today. Then like the bottom 2/3 or more of the article is, here's the other part of the article from last week or the week, the bringing you up to speed. So any article should stand alone mostly. And that's all well and good in print media because you may not have access to the last paper. You may not have been reading the paper from a month ago. You may have sent one article to a remote reader, sending it across the Atlantic, and they will see but I get the details. Here's the headline and the details, right? So there's some value of that with print media on paper in the old days. We don't have those. So we can do better, and we can, and we must. We have today huge swaths of open data, which is something we'll get into a lot more in the near term. We have rich user interfaces. We don't need to rely on recycled paper with ink on our fingers. So you can actually have rich user interfaces. We can have language translation. That's probably good enough for 80%. Some of the nuance and subtlety and proper names may be mangled a bit, but for the most part, you can figure out what's going on even if you don't speak the language of the author of the content, and that's only going to become more possible with all of our AI taking over. Analytical and visualization tools we are lousy with them. You want to put some points on a map, you almost have to avoid doing that at this point. You want to give a chart or a graph or a spreadsheet or some other visualization, some animation. These are all well within the realm. And now AI can help with filling in some of the content, some of the summary, hopefully not writing articles outright, but certainly AI will have a place, a growing role in the reporting of and analysis of quote unquote news. Classic reporting and the work of investigative journalists will ideally benefit from this. We'll see how things go in the near term, but ideally the ability to summarize probably will be very valuable. The ability to take many news sources or many reporting sources, many investigative journalist inputs to draw conclusions or the bases of conclusions, right? So once you hand everything over to AI, who knows? But if the AI tools can generate human readable summaries and maybe find details or create visualizations, etc., to aid in the dissemination of the news, the work done by the investigative journalist, for example. And I don't want to underplay the investigative journalist's role is really, when you get right down to it, that is what the fourth estate is. That is freedom of the press. You really cannot hand that over to automation, AI, etc. And you can't merely snap your fingers and be an investigative journalist by reporting. You can't just take the work of others and summarize it. That's the actual... If journalism was a science, then those are the people in the lab, right? User-generated content is a completely viable way to include contribution to journalism, reporting, and general presentation. So if you have an actual, I'm not trying to be mean, but if you have a real, quote unquote, real journalist getting the data, getting the documents, getting the timeline, getting the names and the quotes in a auditable way, right? They got their news notepad. If anybody asks, yes, this was said by this person when I talked to them on this day, right? So you can back up the quotes. Reporter pulling some of this stuff in, generating some supporting information, visualizations, getting on the news, writing the article, everybody on the byline. So the ability to have real people contribute to that process, once the article is published. And so when I worked at salon.com, for example, they were just exploring converting from a letter to the editor, classic print media, to user comments. This was before the age of Discuss, before Reddit, before it was probably, I think it was in the Slashdot era. Yeah, it was in the Slashdot era for sure. So not a new concept, but the notion that you would have an actual news. See, Slashdot was doing commentary. So you could post links to whatever, make a snarky comment as your post, and people would comment on it, and that's fine. But Salon presented itself as an actual news outlet with actual reporters. And so their reaction to, what, you're going to have anybody just write what they want and have it published next to what I wrote? There was some pushback on that. But let's say qualified or legitimate user content from the masses probably has value as long as it's stays on topic. Now, we live in a world where people will troll, they will publish vitriol of all manner, they will go way off topic, they will be inappropriate and worse, and that's not as good. If AI can aid in that, I think that'll be a bigger problem with fewer successes in the near term. But actual on the ground, like, one journalist does not have the resources to talk to 1,000 people. But if 1,000 people read the reporting and can contribute, like, I saw this, that was over there, the car was blue, whatever, they can contribute facets to the gem of the story. That's actual value. And that is one of the upsides to digital media publishing that is certainly used, but I don't think it's really maximized. When we did do our letters feature, there was something of we had the same problem, right? So anybody could write whatever they want. the Open Salon project at the time, the goal was to have community-driven reporting in general. Like that was, users could be primary sources. So people out in the world could write content, could comment on it. And there you had some idea who the people were. The example I always give is if you write a camera review, my favorite website for that was Imaging Resource, but I don't know if they're still around. So Imaging Resource, very high level, or low level, I guess, expert photographer presentation. A lot of details, sample images. If people wanted to comment on that, there's a difference between a professional photographer who uses cameras daily or more and is not only concerned with, but informed about differences, features, color space, f-stop, sensor size, the difference between different types of sensors, focal lengths. They are intimately aware of the details versus, I have a pocket camera that I take a picture of a thing once in a while. Those opinions will be vastly different, both useful. Because if I'm looking for a camera that I'm going to have in my pocket and take pictures now and then, I may not be so concerned with the microscope detail, but in other times I might be. So understanding where people are coming from, their perspective, is invaluable. It's difficult to do, but it ultimately makes the user-generated content, the contribution of the masses, that much more valuable. So it's something that I believe will need to be solved in the next era of news and journalism and media platforms and reporting and so on. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, back from another pause there. Hopefully we'll make it. The next section of my notes is tricky: authority, authenticity, and anonymity. So you as a content creator, or reporter, or journalist, or whatever role you're playing in this whole process, have a certain amount of credibility. I was just I was giving an example from the camera photographer, hobbyist perspective. So you have a certain amount of credibility. What you have to contribute is based on not only work you've done and knowledge you have and sources you've examined and so on, but whether you are believed. If your readers don't trust you, then, well, it doesn't really matter at that point. So you have a certain amount of authority that may be granted to you, but it's also something you will earn, something you will demonstrate. There's a certain amount of authenticity. That's something you bring to the table and people can choose to believe you. And from those, some sort of credibility will be assigned by your audience. Anonymous sources are still important. They might even be critical. Some people need to come forward with information, whether it's Pentagon Papers or various documents from the NSA. I only laughed because, that didn't go as planned probably. Snowden and his family living in Russia. But it's important to be anonymous, at least for some time, so that there is not backlash. Not everybody's going to honor the fair use concept. So being anonymous does protect people from meeting unfortunate ends or having to tolerate unfortunate circumstances for the sake of sharing information, whistleblowing, and so on. So being anonymous is important. Anonymity is at odds with authority and authenticity, though. So if you don't know who the person is, or what's the source of this piece of information, can't tell you. Well, I don't know if we believe you. If you're a fan of computer technology, you may know that there are always releases of unreleased information from reliable, anonymous sources. What do they always include when they say, we have a source who has been reliable in the past? So they develop a track record. Now, that person, that anonymous source, cannot merely, they can actually, but if they just dump stuff onto a social media account, some anonymized channel, their audience can judge as they may. So the track record is a hit or miss with individual readers. What could happen, though, is that the anonymous source publishes to a few well-known, trusted, authoritative and authentic content creators, reporters. And then those people will say, I have talked to this person. I know this person. I can't tell you who they are. And this is rather famous, the way that you report on a confidential source. So anonymity has value, almost certainly becomes more useful or even useful at all with an honest broker with authority and authenticity. These are important because, the trusted investigative reporter, journalist, investigative journalist, reporter, or anyone will confer their credibility onto this anonymous report. If the anonymous report ends up being false, the quicker the information can be corrected, the better. So having that one trusted, authoritative broker to adjust in a timely fashion with some transparency as much as can be allowed helps with that. Ultimately, it's the authenticity and authority of the source that people are actually consuming, right? So if I'm watching your YouTube video, if I'm listening to your audio program, reading your blog or your news reporting, if you prove to be authentic and believable and you demonstrate authority, you get things right, your credibility with me goes up. And so when you tell me you have an anonymous source, I will say, well, you've been authoritative and authentic till now, and I will trust that you will tell me if this anonymous source is wrong. So again, some of that trust can be conferred onto the anonymous source. Attribution is important. There can't be attribution with an anonymous source, but as attribution goes, it helps with conferring that credibility between news stories, topics, threads of discussion. As an ongoing story develops, it can impact how the creation of a larger tapestry takes place. Credibility and attribution go together so that you know who you're hearing from, who they worked with, who gets credit for this work, who can I trust over time, etc. So these are all important, and I don't know, this is my opinion, I don't know that they are valued as highly as they could or should be in the age of throwaway social media posts. If you are using TikTok as a source of authority and authenticity, we might be done here. We're almost done, promise. Clickbait and sensationalism. So advertising and circulation numbers were already a problem in the days of yellow journalism, right? Sell more papers, charge more for advertising. Whatever you can do to increase your distribution, your readership, whatever you can do, you get more money for it. Your reward comes from your advertisers. Your circulation numbers are bragging rights, but also that's how you clean up. Maybe put the other guy out of business. So circulation numbers are key. Even back then, without seeing a specific number, if everyone in your office, if everyone in the library, everyone in your coffee shop, wherever you are, everybody's looking at the same newspaper, but you're the one with the other newspaper. Well, what do they know that I don't? Maybe I should be reading that newspaper. So it's very easy to look around and see that, everybody's reading that one. Maybe there's a reason. Now, you may know that the one you're reading is correct. That can vary. Today, likes and follows and views and shares, these metrics not only drive dopamine, if that's really a thing. There's some controversy about that. But let's assume for a moment that the content creator, the reporter, the journalist really likes the fact that people are reading, listening to, watching what they created. They appreciate the work that they've done. They're part of the story as the consumer of it. They're learning along the way. Maybe they're reading a multi-part or a longer, or maybe they're buying the book. So that can make, that's part of doing work, is actually knowing that it was worthwhile, especially if you weren't paid very much for it. So at least you know that you made a difference. Sometimes that's motivation. Sensationalism, though, can start to creep in very easily. The more visible those likes and follows and views, you will almost daily now hear in the meta reporting in the YouTube cluster, YouTubers on YouTubers talking about, well, this one got 4 million views in 2 days, and this one had 10,000 likes in 24 hours, and this one, they know. And there's at least one website, which I believe is Blade Tube, something like that. And it will show you all sorts of metrics. And people pore over those metrics. because you must know if people are viewing your content, if you should adjust your headline, if you should change your thumbnail, if you should take down a video completely. I went to school with someone who dropped classes so that he could maintain a 4.0 GPA. Doesn't matter if he needed that class or not, he'll just take it next semester. So you can skew your totals appropriately. And with digital media, there's no paper floating around. You just take down the article, maybe it's in the Internet Archive, but you can adjust things, and hopefully you're putting update notices so people know that you've changed things. But end of the day, people don't really look at those either. So you can ultimately tune your engagement with your audience, maximize those metrics, especially if they're visible. Social media sharing, you can show, hey, this was shared 4,000 times. All bragging rights. And it turns into a numbers game, literally, not necessarily credibility, veracity, all these other trifle topics. So if credibility is conferred based on these metrics rather than the authority and authenticity and so on, then the value of reporting may suffer. That is to say, if you choose to believe what the opinion is of the largest podcaster on the planet, that's not me. If you're going by popularity rather than on accuracy, veracity, consistency, credibility, if it's purely a numbers game on both sides, well, we're in trouble. So what comes next? And now we're at the part of the what can we do about it part, because I think I've kind of been clear that there are some things that don't work. It's important to have news. It's important to know what's happening. An informed public is vital to society. Funding local media from the top, is that still sensible? Personally, I don't think so. There are a few organizations aiming to do this. I linked to Rebuild Local News as one. I'm not endorsing them. That was just, I found that in the Atlantic article, I came upon the Atlantic article about what might come next. So there are a few efforts. There are a few nonprofits, especially news reporting in a true fourth estate, protected free press for the sake of, maintaining democracy, lofty goals. For the sake of that, probably nonprofit, not being driven by the entertainment division, not being driven by which comic you're publishing. These are probably more likely receiving federal funds to drive local media. So in this case, is the New York Times local media? Technically, yes. Is the Washington Post local media? Technically, yes. In reality, probably more likely something like, not quite Patch, but maybe smaller local focus papers. Funding papers of record becomes a bias problem immediately. So driving local media with a hands-off approach from your funding sources might be interesting. I don't know. So this would be more like PBS. So PBS has an infrastructure that works across the country, across the United States. So they receive funding, but they also take donations, and there are local channels. So the local channel can do not quite a telethon. What do they call it? A fund drive? I've certainly seen my share when I was watching TV when I was very young. In Phoenix, I think it was Channel 8? 8 or 30? I think it was 8, Channel 8. So yeah, you would see every once in a while they would do fundraising between segments of a TV show on PBS. So PBS is valuable. There's room for bias. There's some complaining about, what funding goes towards which programming and so on. That's one way. Should we return to the same methodology? Should we really pursue top-down, editor-in-chief and editors and sections and print media that's just being presented as, digital articles? Is the standard television news format, but in a YouTube video, sufficient? Is the split screen punditry of news analysis programs on cable news, the 24-hour news cycle, should these be propagated in what is apparently a losing business model? Should we switch instead to the individual reporter providing reporters and journalists and even just general content creators who might be expert in some areas, should they be more easily able to publish their content directly to their audience, to their readers and listeners and viewers? Substack, YouTube, those are just two examples of tons, are examples where those work, sort of. There are caveats. All the things we've talked about apply. If you are a fan of Matt Taibbi and you subscribe to his Substack, great. One thing that breaks down there, if you want to support Matt Taibbi, and I have read some of his books, but I don't subscribe to his Substack. If you want to subscribe and support that reporter, maybe you're spending $5 a month. Maybe there's 10 other reporters you'd like to, that's $50 a month. That starts adding up a little bit. So that becomes a sort of a burden on the consumer. Kind of tricky. Something to think about. Could those individual creators, I'll just use that broad term for journalists, reporters, can these content creators become eligible as news providers for some sort of funding, federal or otherwise? That's a tricky subject, rife with controversy. So I will get to the end of today's episode by mentioning my favorite, which is a bottom-up approach with an information sharing platform. So not Twitter X, not Facebook, and certainly not Nextdoor, not TikTok, but a information sharing platform that is purpose-built to share information, not to monetize bouncy videos and extreme clickbait, etc. An actual information sharing platform, probably a nonprofit, maybe a 501c3, maybe a charity organization, but certainly a nonprofit organization that is in some way accountable and transparent. Built in some ways on legacy like old RSS and some print media, but using old communication protocols. HTTPS is not going anywhere anytime real soon. So we can publish web pages and mark them up with metadata and open graph and all that. But we can also sprinkle in modernity. ActivityPub comes to mind. Much more proactive use of data visualization, language translation, maps, charts, timelines, hyperlinking. I shouldn't have to present 75% of one article is from the previous article or articles, right? Should I even be writing articles? If I have a news report about, unfortunately, someone in the greater Vegas area, a pedestrian being struck by a car, I can write 500 words on that. Or I can write 25 words and I can put a marker on a map, and I can indicate direction, vehicle type, whether the person was charged, arrested, whatever. So these are data points that I don't have to read articles. I can look at data. Data is hard to fudge, if I can use that old school term. I can dance around the scenario, but if I put on a map and it was a white Ford Taurus going 80 miles an hour northwest on this street, cross this intersection on the map, the person was hit here, and you have all these data points and vectors and car, year, make, and model. These are all data points. They're not anecdotal story. The who, what, why, when, where, how components can be data. Not 100% of the time, but they can be data. And data makes it easier to cross-reference and to refer to over time and to link different articles or incidents or event summaries or whatever you want to call them. So rather than publishing an article today and then an article next week with an update with 75%, do recall this was the white Taurus heading 80 miles an hour, you would just include on a timeline a series of events, and you'd say, oh, here's how they fit together. This took 1 week, and this happened, and then this happened. Here's the data, and I'd like to cross-reference other incidents that may have involved that vehicle that are in, so there's all manner of things that can be accomplished with modern tools and modern use of technology rather than presenting human-readable missives, anecdotal accounts, even if they are written by professional journalists and news reporters. They're anecdotal accounts with details sprinkled in with a little bit of wow to make them interesting. Anytime you listen to a sportscaster running through the scores, they got to come up with an interesting way of saying one team beat the other team, right? Same with news reporting. You got to make it interesting. You got to make it eye-catching. You got to make it exciting. Even as a writer, you get bored, right? You're going to throw in a few extra words here and there. Ooh, I got to make 500 words, or in the old days, it would be column inches, right? In order to justify having 2 advertisements on this page, I got to have body text that I can place the ads in. Actual thing at Salon. Like, okay, how do we insert ads? We need this much. If we have this much body text, we can insert another ad. That's another slot for inventory, right? So these are considerations in modernity, in legacy reporting and print media in digital form. But in modernity, you can actually look at, like, how can I share this data, make it useful, make it easy to consume, easy to understand, easy to translate. You can still have ad-driven content, but you don't have to play games in delivering the message. Can you save money by not filling out your writer's room, your staff, with people writing word counts instead of utility? Maybe. So that is my take. We just need to know that the who, what, when, where, why, how, and wow can be left off the table or minimized. Wow is great sometimes, but when it comes to news or finding out what's happening, if you want to find out if a missing person has been found, you should know that immediately. You should not have to read 500 words, go through 2 ads, pop-ups, etc. I have too many stories from Salon and other scenarios where advertising was used or misused. It's ridiculous. So ad-driven, maybe not the way forward. Advertising is one business model. I don't think it's the only one. Value for value is fun. Buymeacoffee.com is one, etc. So as I may have mentioned, there is a project we're working on at the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. 2 components. One is Smart Social. That is intended to say it's like a social media platform, but it's smart. So it's not about reordering your news feed. It's about information sharing. It's about using modern tools like ActivityPub, older tools like RSS feeds, using contacts like vCard, events like vEvent for iCalendars, things like this. So it's some old and new to make things work, focusing on data, open data especially, which is very popular here in the Greater Vegas area. So there's Smart Social, and then the My Muni project is about, you can say my community or my municipality, but it's what do I need to access with visualization, presentation, language translation, all of these smart social bits of data, and then maybe some news aggregation, some summaries, etc. So a modern platform, bringing in some of the old, focusing on some of the new, but not built around the notion that a printed newspaper article is still the holy grail of sharing information. Hopefully those days are fading. We can make use of better ways, better methods, better tools, modern technology, but still somewhat human readable. And that is where I will leave it today. Thank you for listening. As always, the FFS Talk audio program will, of course, be welcoming guests if there are any who would like to participate. Our website will feature an interface for that. Everything takes longer when it's only one person. Of course, if there's 2, it takes even longer. But there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of cool things going on. I will talk about some of them here. I've just mentioned one of the projects for Innovate for Vegas Foundation to try to tackle the modern day media platform and community information sharing. So there you go. Don't forget Quaggling Sand, FFS Talk, which is this program you're listening to right now, the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program around our innovation projects, and of course Cafe Genius Impresarios about our entrepreneurial ecosystem in the Greater Vegas area. And as you can no doubt hear, my voice is already left the building. It's already gone. It's already checked out. And that is where I'll leave it. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.